Hi there, and welcome again to the Explaining History YouTube channel. And I want to talk today about historical memory. This is very important at the moment because there seem to be innumerable countries around the world that are kind of the hostage to historical memory. Perhaps this is true at all times, but it has been increasingly true since 2008. So in 2008, and I keep harping on about this, as we all know, the world economic system based on neoliberalism, the system that had operated or had been in infancy and development since 1979 and really took flight after 1989, the fall of communism, was plunged into crisis, and it hasn't really worked since. So we're in this kind of hiatus, this historical parentheses between one set of economic workings and another, between a semi-functioning globalisation, which really was a globalisation based on the accumulation of capital by a small number at the top, and the extraction of wealth from pretty much everybody else. That broke down in 2008 with the economic crisis, and really what also broke down was the narrative of globalisation, that a rising tide lifts all boats. So as the narrative of globalisation has ceased to function, so there has been a kind of a retreat from globalism into a more parochial nationalism. We see it this kind of at its most crude in the UK in Brexit, but Britain certainly wasn't the first to take this journey. If you look at the increasingly tribal politics in India, for example, and in other parts of Asia, the Brexit process that we see at the moment certainly has its kind of global antecedents. And why do we have a retreat into nationalism, into these kinds of ideas of the past, myths really? Well, perhaps it's because nationalism itself generally tends to look to the past for solutions to the present. That nationalism tends to thrive on there being a long chain story, a kind of a coherent national narrative. There was the spectacle of Jacob Rees-Mogg at a Tory convention shouting to his braying friends that the Brexit triumph would be better than, I think he mentioned, Agincourt, Waterloo, Blenheim, and El Alamein, creating this kind of long chain of historical events since the beginning of the 15th century that would now be kind of culminating in Brexit, or Brexit would be another step along that road. So they're going into the past in obviously the most ludicrous of manners. I'm mentioning everything from Henry V, and perhaps if you ask them, they would go even further back than that. Why? Because to create a kind of a stable narrative of English exceptionalism, and we're not even talking about British exceptionalism here, English, which is what Brexit really is all about. To be creating a stable narrative of English exceptionalism, and England being special and different, and being the, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, the plucky little battler against the rest of the world, or the triumphant buccaneering nation from everyone from sort of Sir Francis Drake onwards, is comforting. It helps make sense. I mean, it is a nonsense, obviously, but it helps make a type of sense. Human beings generally tend to flock to coherent stories which have a kind of a beginning, middle and end, and place the nation and the individual as part of the national tribe in some kind of broader context. Good guys, bad guys, heroes, villains, destiny, national kind of renewal, all this sort of stuff. So it is the kind of hugely emotive politics, but in a time of immense economic dislocation, when the forces of global capitalism tend to uproot things at a faster rate than they create them, and the power of new forces such as the internet, social media, and the pace of change and celebrity culture, and the 24-hour news cycle that leaves us constantly bewildered. Comforting stories based around national identity are hugely important. You can see this in America with Trump. You can see this all around the world with these new resurgent populisms. So they're in part the response to globalisation, and they're in part the creation of the current wave of globalisation's failures. Will we have another epoch of globalisation? Most certainly, I suspect this probably will happen. It's been ongoing probably since about the 15th century, and will continue to do so in its various kind of productive and bloody guises. However, one of the reasons for our crisis at the moment is that we are stuck in facing some of the consequences of the failure of the current model of globalisation.